Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Hey Sister. Hey Sister, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm tired, but it's for good reasons.
It is definitely for a good reason. I see a couple folks coming in. Let us know where you're watching from. We are, as you can see, in our secret location. And excited to be with you all this evening. We have a very special guest that we're welcoming back to Hey Sister after a few years, Mr. Charles Brown. Hey, Charles, how's it going?
Hey, can I get a hey brother?
Hey, brother.
What's up? Hey sisters. Good to see you all again.
Yes, it is good to see you. And we are again continue to be amazed by the work that you're doing. So I can't wait till you share more with the folks. If you're out there and you're watching live, we thank you for watching. We want you to share, like, follow, share this. Go ahead, sister, get on your phone, share it with the people, share it with your friends, let them know that you're tuning in live to Hey Sister. We also want you to join the conversation in the comments. That's where all the action happens, in the comments. And if you're watching live right now, let us know where you're watching from. And what city are you in, who you're representing. And we're gonna dive into this conversation on this evening. So in typical Hey Sister fashion, we always start off our evening with hot topics. And we only have one hot topic. It's the reason we both tired and we look a little worn today, but it's okay. It's all for good reason. So we're here in our hometown of Thibodaux, Louisiana.
In the secret bunker.
In the secret bunker. Yes, the secret bunker.
Yeah.
Told y'all the location. But we're here in our hometown. On yesterday, we had the honor and the privilege and the pleasure of being part of a building dedication for Nicholls State University. It was one of two dedications that happened on yesterday, but one of those buildings that are being renamed
has been renamed
was renamed in our Father's name. And so from henceforth, what was once known as Polk Hall, or the Education and Behavioral Sciences Building, is now known as the Old Cleveland Hill Hall. And yay, we're so excited about that. And it was a beautiful day.
The weather was terrible, but it was a beautiful day.
Yes, and that's it. The weather was terrible, but we moved it inside, and I thought it actually was better that it was inside. It was a great experience. I dropped a link in the for you all to take a read and learn about the two people who these buildings were named after. But our father had such a rich legacy on that campus. We got to speak for a little bit on it, and I was really happy that one of those people who was instrumental for him even being there. So he integrated the athletic program. He went on to become the first Black dean in the College of Education, or first Black dean of the university. And so, as he said, his athletic career was short. His career as a professor and as education, he's also a professor emeritus at Nicholls. Is astonishing. But Coach Don Landry, and his wife Lucille were both there, and that they still were able to be here, because that's part of their labor too, right? We don't go through this life alone. And one of the things our father talked about yesterday in his speech was support. And we don't go through this life alone. So having those people who were really instrumental, Coach Sanders and his wife, Ann, they were there as well, because Coach Sanders hired him as an assistant basketball coach when he was teaching middle school, right? And he was, and he was like, no, Cleve, you can do this. And so those people, you talk about leadership and people having instrumental roles in your life, taking a chance on you because they see something in you and that will will carry you all the days of your life. And shout out to my good friend Leslie Honore for writing a poem for us that we were able to share with our father, and was absolutely beautiful. And it's the first time he's been speechless. And I know Miss Debbie, I see she's on here watching. It was the first time he was literally speechless. So we're excited about that too. Sister, what are your reflections on yesterday?
I would say it was just great seeing everybody who was able to come out. Our apologies that there were so many people we wanted to invite, and I think we were trying to invite everybody we knew, but again, it's one of those charge it to our heads, not our heart situations. But it was a great day. We got like he tried to limit the amount of time that we spoke, and of course we took
in typical Hale sister fashion
as we needed. But no, it was a great day, and I'm so happy that he is, as my sister articulated yesterday, is alive to witness it, because for many years when this subject came up, he would always say in the state of Louisiana it's against the law to name a building after a living individual. And we understand why, because sometimes after people get stuff in their name, they clown. And so that's part of the reason that it was the law. And so we were happy that they're able to make certain provisions now. And so the board of the University of Louisiana system approved it. And now the rest is history. So.
And the rest is history. Now I know I see Jeff is chiming in. He said, "Hello, family. Hello, my good brother." And so I'm gonna go ahead and then let you chime in, even though you were not here, Charles. But since you want to talk about the Mississippi men, and go ahead on and say something.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate right now for me to hear you all acknowledge what a great mentor your father has been. You didn't mention that he was from Mississippi, unfortunately. I wish you had started with that, given the fact that, Demetri, you're married to a great man from Mississippi. And Christina, we know you too. I believe it with someone from Mississippi. And you've been my big sister for a very long time. And you talked about the impacts I've had and you've had on me directly and indirectly. So I wish you all had started off with this great Mississippi man, because you have another one before you today. And I just want to say salute to your father. From a distance, he's been a mentor, a guiding light for me as well. Since the moment Christina mentioned him to me a while ago, just a giant he is, both figuratively and literally. He's a great example. So salute to Mr. Hill. And that Hill name has significance in Mississippi as well. As you know, part of my family are Hills as well. So perhaps there are some connections there as well. So salute,
Well,
Mr. Hill.
Well, you're friends with some Lockets as well, and there are a lot of
Hmm.
Hills that are friends with Lockets in our families. So I'm pretty sure there's some connection there.
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn said it best. Louisiana woman, Mississippi man. We out here doing the best we can. That's all. I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna let we a country song all the way over here. Anywho, well, Charles, we're gonna turn it over to you. You have some information that you want to share with the people. It's been some years since you've been on. You doing this great work and talking about creating equitable cities. You have a little bit you want to share, and then we're gonna get into your a little bit more about your personal story.
Yeah, so I'm going to share something on arrested mobility. It's been some work I've been working on the past 6 or 7 years. So I'm really looking forward to the feedback and discussion. So give me a second here to pull that up. Please let the people know they can ask any and all questions. No
Yes, well, we want
questions.
you all to, like I said, join the conversation in the comments. That's where you type in your questions. We'll get to all of the questions as time permits. And we're gonna pull up Charles's thing here, and we'll let you go to it.
All right, let me know when I got the green light.
Go for it, sir.
All right, if you all can mute, we're good to go. Welcome, everyone. Charles T. Brown, founder and CEO of Equitable Cities, and the host of the Arrested Mobility podcast. Shout out to all my noobs out there, Jeff and others. I want to talk to you tonight about arrested mobility, the importance of centering equity and access in mobility. I want to start though with this picture of me because some of you may have forgotten. I did at one particular time have hair and I was very shy. But, as with all things, things change. In this particular case, I no longer have hair, but I'm still very shy, believe it or not. But I share this picture with you because I prefer to be referred to as Charles T. Brown, not Charlie Brown. I think if my mother wanted me to be named Charlie, she would have done so, especially if you know my mother. But my name is Charles T. Brown. Secondly, I share that because I'm a pracademic. I'm a pracademic because I work inside and outside of academia. And lastly, I'm a street level researcher. I'm a street level researcher because I think the answers to many of the problems that we're trying to solve are found in the streets among the people. I'm also from a very small town, and that town is Sugar Lock, Mississippi. Um, I think the official name is Shaquela, but the locals call it Sugar Lock. Sugar Lock is where my mother lives. It's where my father's family is from, my mother's family. But it's really the place that made me into the man that I am. So no matter where I go, no matter who I speak to, all around the world, I remind them of this little place that I come from, Sugar Lock, and it's always near and dear to me and my family. But I want to talk to you today about arrested mobility. In doing so, I want to get some things clear as it relates to equity. So often we hear the term equity in everyday conversations, both personally and professionally. So I felt it would be important to kind of level set. So what is equity? Equity is the guarantee of fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. Equity, though, is also about acknowledging that there are historically underserved and underrepresented populations. And then lastly, that if we are to achieve equity, we have to have an understanding around the need to give people what they need to enjoy full, healthy lives. Now, in the presentations I've done around the world, most people have no issues with that being the definition of equity. However, when you say equity is the presence of justice and fairness within the procedures, the processes, and the distributions of resources of by institutions or systems, then people start to push back. They start to feel like you're personalizing a conversation about equity. But I remind them, yet and still, equity is not a desktop exercise. To understand equity, it requires an understanding of the underlying or the root causes of inequalities and oppression within our society. So, with that basic understanding of what equity is, one can't help but understand then the importance of racial equity. See, racial equity is about transforming the behaviors, the institutions, and the systems that disproportionately harm people of color. It's about increasing access to that power, redistributing and providing additional resources, and eliminating all barriers to upward mobility. But what equity is not, or racial equity in this particular case, is not about excluding other marginalized populations. Because in the equity and the racial equity conversation, we understand the importance of intersectionality, which takes us then to setting the stage regarding clarity around which forms of equity are we speaking to when we're having these personal and professional conversations. Are we discussing one's ability or disability as it relates to a program, a policy, or a plan, one's income, one's mode of travel, or one's race and ethnicity? Better yet, are we talking about one's language, one's geography, or one's process? So there are various equity dimensions. And in order to tackle the problems that exist around racial equity, it's imperative that you call a spade a spade. And that spade in this particular case is there is no variable more important than race in the majority of conversations that we have each and every day. And to illustrate this point and to have you understand why intersectionality is so important, I invite you to answer these questions for yourselves as you consider your own identities. First, which identities do you think about most often? I'd lie if I wouldn't say race isn't the identity that I think about most. I'm starting also to think about my age a lot more, especially since I eclipsed 40 years old. Then there's identities that I think about least often. Once you achieve a high level of success, once you have your educational attainment, I think it becomes the identity that you think about less often. And that is the case for me. I think about my educational status least often these days. Then you have to think about which of your own identities would you like to learn more about. Some of us have taken 23andMe. Some of us have done all of the ancestry tests. I want to learn more about the racial and ethnic categories that I didn't know about previously, such as those identities that were from Europe. I would love to know more about my family, those connections. I have a great idea about how it came about, but I would certainly like to learn more about it. Then you have to ask yourself which of these identities have the strongest effect on how you perceive yourself. For me, again, it goes back to race. It's also starting to be age. And then if I had to choose another category, it would probably be my gender. And then lastly, which of the identities have the greatest effect on how others perceive you? Again, you'll probably hear me say race. But you're wondering at this stage, why then is this important? Well, I invite you to Newark, New Jersey. This is the fifth ward of Newark, New Jersey. It is a majority Black and brown community. This particular photograph has not been photoshopped at all. It looks exactly how it looks in the fifth ward of Newark, New Jersey. I was fortunate to oversee a graduate studio where we were creating a new complete streets plan for that town. Complete streets is simply designing streets for every mode to enjoy them safely and efficiently. And in doing so, meeting with the elders of that community, we asked them what did they want to see changed in their communities. And this is one of the photographs that we shared with them. I invite you all now to put in the chat if you had all the resources in the world, or if you simply wanted to change this environment, what might you do differently? And I will pause here for a few seconds to give you a chance to put that in the chat. Now, some of you are going to start putting things such as I would clean it up, I would put benches, I would repair the sidewalk. What about the building facade? What about the trees? What about the bike lanes? But no matter where you show this picture around the world, guess what people don't say? I would add people. And it's important that you add people, not just for the sake of adding people, but because there are people that live here and who want to enjoy this place every single day, but unfortunate enough to see the things that you see represented here on the screen. And for many of my engineering friends who are roadway designers, many of them believe that when they bring bicycle lanes to a Black community, they don't want it. It's not the fact that they don't want bike lanes. What they don't want is to be erased from the future. And oftentimes they do before and after photographs such as this. And in the after photograph, even though it's a majority Black and brown community, you don't see Black and brown people in the after renderings. So people aren't opposed to the bike lane. They aren't opposed to the so-called gentrification. They are opposed to the idea that they're not going to be there when this change takes place. So this takes us to a little known fact in our industry as it relates to engineering, transportation, and planning more general. And that fact is that urban planning has been weaponized as a tool of oppression within our society. I think it's fair to say it's a silent tool, but it speaks very loudly for those that have the ears to hear it and the eyes to see it. And for evidence of this, all we have to look at or the highway robberies that have taken place across North America. In fact, you can look at the interstate highway in any city around North America, and you're probably going to find that a Black and brown or low income community was displaced. And that was due to the intentionality of government, whether at the federal, state, or local level. You see here with my Louisiana sisters, you can see the historic Treme, which is still a beautiful community, but you can see here on the left how beautiful it was before this very dangerous highway was put right down the middle of it, causing many people to live very unhealthy lives now due to rising asthma rates, flooding, um, bad air quality, you name it. And most importantly, they're disconnected from the very people of whom they had access to in the beginnings. But it doesn't stop there. It also has a connection to climate. Transportation and climate has a relationship that most people don't talk about. See, I was fortunate and unfortunate to have experienced Hurricane Katrina in 2005. I was in Jackson, Mississippi at the time, and I've never seen as much devastation as I saw during Katrina. And I definitely saw the ugly side of humanity. I also saw the beautiful side, but unfortunately, the ugly side overshadowed what good I saw that happened during that hurricane. We also, when we moved to New Jersey in 2012, several years later, we experienced Hurricane Sandy here in New Jersey. And for those that are wondering, no, hurricanes do not follow me. The point being is that uh, co- um, there's a very strong relationship between our transportation decisions and the impacts they have on our climate, which takes us to roadway fatalities. When you look at the Dangers by Design report that had data in it as far back, I think it's 2012, what you find is that those who are most at risk are older adults, people of color, and people walking in low income communities. When we take a look at the older adults, their relative pedestrian danger index for them, aged 50 and older, was more than a third higher than the general population. When you look at those who are people of color between 2008 and 2017, Black Americans were 72% more likely to have been struck and killed by drivers while walking. And you may ask at this point, why should we care if we're not Black, brown, and low income? Well, I mean, Black, brown, or a senior person 50 plus. Well, you should care because no matter what your age is or what your race is, at some point, we all traverse through a low income neighborhood. And people living in neighborhoods where the median household income is $36,000 or less were killed at a much higher rate than our counterparts. This takes us to the fact that many believe is simply behavioral. That's what the engineers, the planners will tell you across North America, that these people are being killed because they're making bad choices. They say it's behavior, it's all about the choices that we make. That couldn't be further from the truth. The truth is, when you look at this framework that I'm showing you, most people are focusing downstream. I'll use smoking as an example. My mother smoked, and I had a lot of questions about why she smoked and why many people in the neighborhood that I grew up in Sugar Lock smoked. And when I started taking health courses, people would say, you know, whether it's your mother, your aunt, your uncle, or whoever, if they continue to smoke, they're going to get a disease and injury, which will ultimately lead to their mortality. And being the son that my mother raised, I used to always ask questions. Well, that just can't be it. Why is it that they smoke in those places and not in other places? I started asking questions about the need to go upstream. And so, what upstream teaches you is that yes, it's true that risk behaviors will lead to disease and injury and also to mortality, but you cannot ignore the fact that one's living conditions has a relationship to one's risk behaviors, and institutional inequities by government agencies, schools, etc., create the living conditions, and then the social inequities by class, by race, by immigration status is by directional relationship is what creates those living conditions which influence those behaviors, which leads to disease and injury, and ultimately mortality. So, what does this mean? Well, we're not excusing behavior. But the fact of the matter remains, if someone comes to you and said the environment made me do it, please believe them. So what we know then from our work is that one's race determines one's place, which determines one's health. And so what we're finding is, I'll take you to Peoria, Illinois, to illustrate a point here. For those who like maps like I do, white people are represented predominantly by the blue that you see here on the screen in Peoria. Black people are represented by the green, Hispanics by the purple, and our Asian brothers and sisters are represented by the other shades that you see. I want you to use the chat. Why do I want you to use the chat? Because you're going to see something particularly alarming here. I don't want to see if you can name it or identify it. The fact of the matter is, if you live in Peoria, everyone knows that someone who lives in a white neighborhood there will almost never go to a black neighborhood. And a lot of people in the black neighborhoods won't get the opportunity to go to an affluent white neighborhood. But what do you see on the map? What is the situation that causes people not to be able to visit other parts of their community? Well, we're not going to pick on Peoria. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go to Detroit. Let's go to Motor City. And if blue represents where white people live, green, black, Hispanic, purple, what do you see on the map? Someone please type that in the chat. Tell us, what do you see? But it wouldn't be fair to pick on Detroit. So we're going to go to Houston, Texas, one of the largest metropolitan areas in all of America, if not North America. And if blue represents where white people live, green, where blacks live, purple, Hispanic, what do you see? What do you see? But it wouldn't be fair if we just stopped in Houston. So we're going to go to Atlanta, which basically determined the presidential election many years ago. And some of you were wondering, why are they waiting on those votes from Southeast and Southwest Atlanta? Well, if blue represents where white people live, green represents where black people live, some of you may get it. But in order for you to really get it, I got to take you to the nation's capital. And by now, some of you should be saying, if you haven't said already, because I can't see the chat, it is racial residential segregation. If you don't believe it's racial residential segregation, perhaps I'll take you to one of the most progressive cities in North America, that is on paper, New York City. But see, at this point, you may not know that it's intentional. So what I usually do is address the question that most people ask. Are there exceptions? Is there a place you could take us through in North or to in North America where there isn't racial residential segregation? And I say yes. I take them to Portland, Oregon, where there are no black people, no Asian people, or no Hispanic people. Now, for those of you who are from Portland, this is a joke. The point is that in Oregon, it was by law that a black person couldn't move there. So the racial residential segregation that you see in the other cities and the lack of blackness that you see in the Northwest, they were both the result of intentional decisions, deliberate attention on keeping people of color away from these places. So what this means, because many of you will see this as history, this isn't just history, because the fact of the matter is that history doesn't say goodbye. History says, see you later. So what is the later? The later is now. Those stats I showed you in regards to who was being killed on our roadways were from 2017. They just released that data, and guess what? The same people are dying disproportionately. The only thing that has changed is that it is now solely Black and Native Americans. The Hispanic population is below the national average, but Blacks and American Indian and Alaska Native still remain those who are dying disproportionately. And if you see the top 20 places where they're dying, it's mostly the Southeast and the Southwest. Ask yourself, who lives there predominantly? And so that takes us to what is happening in my field as it relates to engineering, planning, health equity, and policy work. See, what's happening is that there are a plethora of federal, state, and local initiatives, plans, and programs all aimed at increasing access for Black and Brown people. But guess what the facts are? Few, if any, are actually working. See, what we know is that the reason theirs not working is most of them are ahistorical and apolitical. They politicize the process, they politicize the data, and thus we're not getting to the root cause of these issues. It's akin to the chart I showed you, where you're blaming someone for smoking without looking at the environment, without looking at the institutions that support that environment or not, and without looking at the social inequities that divide us by class, race, etc. We also know that there's discriminatory law enforcement. We didn't need the incident with George Floyd to happen to understand that, but it did wake a lot of people up. Thirdly, what we know is that there are tangible organizational commitments to DEI, but they're not funding the organizations that were there prior to their interest in DEI and who have been working with Black and Brown people for decades. We also know that there's a lack of, or there's unconscious bias in the criminalization of Blackness in our data, in our culture, and a lot of the work that we're doing. Then there is DEI programs all over America. What are they shielding us from? How are they helping us again when the very organizations who are doing this work have not been getting the funding to do it? Instead, this space has been co opted, as has many spaces, which takes us to many people in health and otherwise say these are social determinants of health. You'll hear that used quite often. These are not social determinants of health, these are political determinants of health. Everything that we do is influenced by politics, whether you're aware of it or not. So, what this takes us to is the fact that I've theorized and I've put out there for several years now that as Black people, our mobility has been arrested. What is arrested mobility? Arrested mobility is this assertion by me that Black people and other minorities have been historically and presently denied by legal and illegal authority their inalienable right to move, to be moved, or to simply exist in public space. See, this has resulted in adverse social, political, economic, environmental, and health effects that are widespread and intergenerational. But they're preventable, which is why we're talking about that tonight. But some of you will say, is there a framework for arrested mobility? Yes, there's a framework, and this framework shows you that arrested mobility stems from four realms of racism: the personal, the interpersonal, the institutional, and the cultural. This leads to the deliberate targeting of Black and Brown people using policy, the self-deputization of white people, which I'll explain in a second here, and law enforcement, which then leads to a particular focus on the travel modes. That is, whether you're Black and Brown and you are walking, biking, driving, taking public transit, using rideshare, or a micromobility device, which then leads to the adverse outcomes that we talked about earlier, and unfortunately, one's mortality. So, some of you would say, how are these populations over police? Well, let's start with walking. Some of the most notable cases of walking that I'll get to in a second include Mike Brown and others. But before I go there, I'm going to explain to you the arrested mobility framework a little more. So, arrested mobility asserts that there are three ways in which your mobility is arrested. The first one is through policy and planning. How does that happen through policy and planning? Look at the example I showed earlier, the racial residential segregation. Then look at the fact that government doesn't invest in certain areas of town. Disinvestment is a decision. Then look at law enforcement, which is the other P. Black and brown boys are heavily policed, whether they're in hoodies or not, throughout North America. And then the last one that isn't talked about as much is polity, Polity. That is the self deputization of non Black citizens. So all of these P's work together with the self deputized non Black citizens using both their influence over policy and planning and policing to arrest the mobility of Black and brown people. So some of you may say, well, I live where I live because that's where I want to live. That is not necessarily true. It's an illusion of choice. A lot of what you think you've determined has already been determined. And if that isn't for you, it's certainly for those of whom you've left behind. So that takes us to, is there evidence to support these claims of arrested mobility across the different modes of transportation? That's where we start with walking. The most notable cases of arrested mobility while walking includes the death of Ahmaud Arbery. What was he doing? Trayvon Martin. What was he doing? Mike Brown. What was he doing? Well, some of you would say, well, we don't want to sensationalize this. What's the data? Well, the data shows that in Jacksonville, Florida, in a study called Walking While Black, 55% of the tickets were issued to Black individuals, even though only 29% of that population identified as Black. In fact, Blacks were 3 times more likely to receive a ticket than whites. And in that city's 3 poor zip codes, they were about 6 times as likely to receive a pedestrian citation. And because at this point, many of you will want to look at your phone, please take out your phone and Google Raquel Nelson from Atlanta, who was a Black single mother and college student who lost her son in a hit and run while crossing the street to their apartment. You're going to see in that particular case that the man who killed her son was later found and admitted to drinking and taking painkillers on the night he killed her son. But she was charged. She was charged. That's all I'll say. I want you to go and Google that. But in the case of arrested mobility, quite frankly, I wish it ended at walking and running. Unfortunately, it does not. It also extends to cycling. And I've drafted many of articles and done so much research on that that you can look to places such as Chicago, Tampa, St. Louis, and others. But what does the data say? When we look at the data as it relates to biking, what we know is that in Tampa, Florida, starting in the Southeast, between 2003 and 2015, Tampa police issued over 10,000 bicycle tickets. 79% of those tickets were issued to Black people. In fact, 100 over 100 tickets were issued to Black kids as young as 3 years old. Yes, 3 years old in Tampa. But it wouldn't be fair to focus on the Southeast. So what we're going to do is go to the more progressive cities on paper. Let's go to Oakland, California, one of my favorite cities in North America. In Oakland, 60% of all bicycle stops included Black cyclists. And if you guessed it, yes, they were less than 30% of the population as well. Which takes us to Chicago. In Chicago, twice as many bicycle tickets are written in majority Black neighborhoods than in majority white or Latino neighborhoods. In fact, in one particular case, 321 bicycle tickets were issued in Austin, a low-income majority Black community, whereas only 5 were issued in Lincoln Park, a wealthy white majority community in Chicago. And if many of you have visited Chicago, especially in downtown, you know you are more than likely to see a white or Latino person on a bike in downtown Chicago than you are in other parts of Chicago. But in the case of arrested mobility, I wish it stopped at biking. Unfortunately, it does not. It also includes the case of Philando Castile and the Queen Sandra Bland. But let's not just focus on the case. What does the data say? Because without data, many feel all you have is an opinion. So when we look at the data, a nationwide study showed that Black and Hispanic drivers are stopped disproportionately to white drivers. Unsurprisingly, was that police are less likely to pull over Black drivers after dusk when the race of the driver is less obvious to police. This takes us to Minnesota. A state commission study in Minnesota found that Blacks and Latinos were 7 times more likely to be stopped by police in white majority neighborhoods. In fact, in 2016, 47% of the arrests by the St. Anthony Police Department in Minnesota were Black individuals, even though the patrol area is only 7% Black. But in the case of arrested mobility, I wish it stopped at walking. I wish it stopped at biking. I wish it stopped at driving. Unfortunately, it does not. It also includes public transit. And one of the most notable stories around that includes the death and murder of Oscar Grant, who was killed by BART police officers in California. And the data shows, particularly as it relates to New York City, While the number of turnstile arrests have decreased significantly, what has not changed is who gets arrested. See, in New York City, they found that 89% of those who were arrested are Black and Hispanic. They also found that the top 10 neighborhoods in New York, the highest number of arrests per subway swipe, were all predominantly Black or Hispanic. And in the case of Adrian Napier, he was a Black teenager who was tackled and aimed at by 10 police officers for fare evasion. The fare was only $2.75. Was it worth his life, his life being ended for $2.75? Now I take you back to Portland, where in 2017, Blacks were 8 times more likely than whites to be charged for certain transit violations in Portland, Oregon. I told you there are no Black people in Portland. So how did that happen? Well, thankfully, Portland later decriminalized this act. But in the case of arrest and mobility, we wish it ends at public transit. Unfortunately, it does not. See, it also includes if you're hopping a ride share, whether that be Uber or Lyft. And see, the data shows that Black females or females in general, my bad, were driven 5% further than males given the same start and finish location. And if you're like me, whether you're in a hoodie or in a suit, 55% of Blacks who have called for a cab at some point have experienced a refusal by the service to send a cab to their community. But in the case of arrest and mobility, we wish it ends there. It does not. It also includes the case of Breonna Taylor and Tamir Rice. See, we're killed, we're hunted, we are arrested, whether we're in our homes or we are a kid out in our own front yards playing or in parks. So people ask, okay, we hear it, we see it. What are these adverse effects? What has resulted from this as we conclude this presentation? Well, what you find is that Black people are 54% less likely to be physically active than whites. And for those of whom are middle income and higher, know that this is regardless of your neighborhood or your individual income level. We also know that areas with larger Black population tend to have lower rates of upward mobility. So when people are saying I'm suffocating, it feels like I can't get up, there's a reason for that. Some of it is personal. We're not going to excuse that. But there are many policy factors out there keeping people in place. And see, this then is disproportionately, associated with food deserts, which are made even worse by a lack of access to transportation options. I talked about growing up in Sugar Lock. If we didn't have a car, we had to drive. Well, whether we had a car or not, we had to drive, about 6 to 10 miles to the nearest food stop. Now they have a small store there, but it doesn't give you the quality foods that you need to be healthy. And then we know as it relates to educational attainment, that racial residential segregation that I showed you it impacts Blacks much more so than whites. And then what we find is that Blacks consistently have less access to important resources and opportunities like healthcare, supermarket, education, and jobs. And then as it relates to the political process, because many of you are saying, why don't you just vote? Well, when you lack transportation, you're at a disadvantage, which makes you more vulnerable to disenfranchisement efforts like a lower density of polling places. See, there's a reason why Black and brown folk voted at a higher rate in the last election. And so at this point, whether Black, brown, white, green, or yellow, some of you are going to say, Charlie Brown, I get it. We're in the same boat. No, we're not in the same boat. We're just in the same storm. And what you need to understand is that whether you've made it or not, there's a huge difference. And the difference comes from the fact that when I visit my barbershop and other places throughout the country, I can see that Black people are tired. See, Black people are so tired. They can't go jogging. They can't ask for help after being in a car crash. They can't walk from the corner store. They can't walk home with a Skittle. They can't break down on a public road with car problems. They can't run. They can't breathe. They can't live. See, our mobility has been arrested, whether it's my grandmother in a wheelchair or my sister on a bike, and it matters not the location in America. Our mobility has been arrested. And it's time that folks like us with the means do something about it. because you can't earn your way out of it. Thank you for your time. I look forward to chatting with my Louisiana sisters about this topic and many others. Love you all.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, Mr. Charles T. Brown, for that very
Charlie, thank you.
thorough presentation. My
Hmm.
sister, you usually do this part, so you like your daddy right now. You kind
Well,
of
no,
speechless.
no, jotted down a couple of things, a couple of notes, because I thought, I love always kind of level setting with the definition. I want to ask folks out there. We've got somebody already saying awesome presentation, so thank you, Geneva. And she's a sister who is in the Orlando area, so I know we got someone else say woo. But you were talking about equity, and how the definition doesn't get real pushback until you start
Yeah.
breaking it down even further. This information needs to be given out to others. Yeah, absolutely. As we even think about the town that we live in now, and where there
Hmm.
are sidewalks and where there are not sidewalks, where people live, where there are the segregation in schools that persists, and different things like that. But I want to get back to the definition of equity. Um, so we talked about this a little bit this morning. We're 99.99 identical on the DNA spectrum, right? It's that 0.1%, 0.01%, 0.01.
Okay, I was going
Let
to
me
get
get it
your
right.
Oh,
math.
you and Christina?
No, that 0.01.
Oh, humans.
Human.
Oh, humans. Got it. Got it.
Yeah, humans. Is that 0.01% that we are making these political decisions that affect people's lives and outcomes, and their ability to really be healthy, whole, and live freely. And so I don't know, brother, because I know what's happening in the DEI spaces too. It ain't much. So how do you propose we really kind of get over that hump?
Where do we start?
Yeah.
Yeah. I kept that part away from you for this conversation, and to belabor the point. I think it starts with as they say in the South, in the Southern Black churches, right? A renewing of the mind, the body, and the spirit, number one. Um, but to give people a framework, I think most people work best when you give them a framework. And so there are a multitude of places that we could start, but I want people to focus on first being able to acknowledge and assess the problem effectively. The first thing that you can do is seek recognition justice. So the first form of justice that you can seek is recognition justice. So recognition justice argues for the existence rights of different cultural and social groups with respect given to these differences. So it basically forces you to ask the question, have you considered the damage inflicted by a lack of recognition and misrecognition? Think about the lack of recognition and misrecognition. The second one is distributive justice, which is what most of us are looking for. It is concerned with the fair allocation of resources among diverse members of the community. But it also, when you're looking at plans, policies, and resources, forces you to ask the question, who has physical access to that street, to that park, or to that trail? If they don't have access for ability or disability reasons, for income reasons, or simply not having access to a bike or a car, then you know you have an issue. The third one is procedural justice. This is about this idea of a fair process. Many Black and brown folk argue the process isn't fair. That's where they're getting us. And the reason why this is happening is because we don't have influence over the design, the operations, and the programming of these spaces. When these decisions are being made, think about how often minority youth are not present when these decisions are made. And I showed you the data. They're not present when the decisions are made, but they're more likely to be the victims of those very decisions by way of traffic collisions. And then lastly, interactional justice. You have to ask the question, what makes people feel welcomed or unwanted in a space? Because it's not good enough to just have the sidewalk if I'm going to be policed differently when I get there. And that's important because African Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement. And the reason I brought up intersectionality and gender concerns is because those Black males that most of us don't protect are being stopped at a rate 7 times that of females. And so we have to look at the importance of recognition justice, distributive justice, procedural justice, and interactional justice. That's how we get to the bottom of it.
Okay. And it's interesting, you talked about those sidewalks. I live in a neighborhood where there's a jogger early in the morning. If you go out early in the morning, you saw him before, didn't you see him?
I heard about him.
You heard about him. Who jogs in a Speedo. He's on the lesser of
Speedo.
in a Speedo, and a lesser, more melanemic person. Because I couldn't picture the more melanated of us being jogging at dark 30 in the morning and no one
Right.
flinching. I'll just leave
Right.
it at that.
So I have a question for you. So these midterm elections, I'll use what happened in the state of Georgia with Stacey Abrams, the campaign for governor, what have you. And this is a little controversial. So, if you don't want to answer or you feel like it's not a good question, I'm fine with it. But, a friend of mine, we saw the statistics, right? So we know that the majority of African Americans came out. Those who voted came out for Stacey Abrams. There are larger Hispanic populations across this country that have not necessarily voted in alignment with the way many African Americans do. However, a lot of our statistics, many of the statistics that you presented here are about the Black and brown communities.
Mostly Black.
Mostly Black, but you did mention some Black and brown communities, and you did mention that a lot of those brown communities are indigenous communities as well. But when it comes to our Hispanic brothers and sisters, while we don't want to in this effort to be equitable, we don't want to dismiss anyone or anyone, but are we doing ourselves a disservice if we don't kind of decouple this conversation a little bit? Because there are some things that I feel like are very specific to Black people who identify as Black in America, and too often the data likes to pull them together.
Go and get to it, Christina. That's your question.
I ask it. Should we be
we're having lunch? Just go and ask me directly. What
no,
you want to ask
I'm
me?
asking the question. Should we be decoupling so much of what we do, whether you say in this equity work, we like to lump Black and brown people together.
Like even the BIPOC.
The term BIPOC, for example.
Right.
Should we be decoupling this and really addressing some issues that are just specific to Black people or African Americans in this country? Because as we see at least from a voting standpoint, political standpoint, and you said all of it's political, right?
All of it's political.
From a political standpoint, we don't necessarily have the same interests.
Well, from a political standpoint, we also don't have the same numbers. We are a racial minority when you speak to, Black people in this country. And the fact remains that in political processes, numbers matter, allegiances matter. And so it benefits you politically, in some cases, to align with other minorities who are experiencing similar oppressions. And I don't want to falsely equate those oppressions, but when you're talking numbers, you need as many allies as possible. So the answer to that question is yes and no. It really depends on what the issue is. Politically, yes, it matters to align, but we also need a group of Black people out there working specifically for Black people, because when they lump us all together, that aggregation of the races normalize the experiences of Black and brown people, so no one focus exclusively on the root causes of our issues. But what you'll find across America is that the moment you say you want to do something on the basis of race, many people say it's illegal. Now, you could do something on the basis of gender, abilities, disabilities, and income. But the moment you start talking race, they say we can't do it. But we know that's not true. You look at President Biden, they passed laws that were specifically aimed at a certain population, the Asian population. President Obama passed laws that were aimed at a gender or a sexual orientation. All of those things should have happened. Let's be clear. But we do need more laws aimed specifically at addressing the root causes of these issues for Black people. So that's where it hurts us when we're lumped together with other people. But for political reasons, we need to be because we don't have the vote to do it by ourselves. Now, you can go outside of that political process and say, I'm going to make so much money that it doesn't impact me, but you're going to leave a lot of Black people behind because not all people can earn their way out of it.
That's fair. That's fair. I guess secondarily to that, in areas where we are, so you went through all of the various cities, and you obviously were shining a light on the fact that this is a residential. I forgot the way you posed
Racial
it.
residential segregation. I did that because
Yeah.
it's most people think it's episodic, but it's thematic. And what I mean by that is it's all over the US. But if I had just shown one example, they would say, well, that's a Cleveland problem or, it's a fifth ward problem. No, it's all over the US.
Agree. And so in places where so if we believe that in certain situations Black people need to be creating policy for Black people that impacts Black people, then where we have cities now, the four largest cities in this country are now led will be led by Black people. So where we have more political influence, what are some of the things we should be or could be doing? Because you mentioned about you used the Treme as an example. Obviously, we're Louisiana girls, and we know that yes, there were health implications of building a highway. A large number of homeless people now live under
Mhm.
the interstate in New Orleans, in and close to the Treme area, and but it also destroyed a very important economic corridor.
Mhm.
So where we have more of this political power, what can we do?
Mhm.
I mean, I
Well,
know you gave us a lot of
well,
procedural.
I know we don't want to falsely equate representation with political power, neither. Just because a
Okay.
Black man or woman stands in that position doesn't mean we have political power. What we
So
have
all
is that a
skin
person,
folk ain't kin folk is what you
all
say.
skin folks ain't kinfolk. But we have to stop playing that game where we get symbolic victories. And we have to look at the policies of a person regardless as to the race of a given people. Like I'm not opposed to white leadership if they're helping Black people.
Mhm.
I am opposed to Black people if they're not helping Black people. And what happens is we get the symbolic victory, and then we don't hold people accountable to doing what they're supposed to do specifically for Black and brown people. See, when we elect Black people, they all of a sudden tell us, well, first they tell us, if you elect me, I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do for my people. They use that verbiage, for my people. When they get elected, they say, I'm not just the representative of Black people, I'm the representative of all people. And so, what we need to start doing is playing a political game, getting into office the people that we know will hold true to the values and the virtues that we're looking for. But if you're looking for some hardcore things that we can do, of course, you can invest in infrastructure in communities. But it can't just be about changing the built environment, because if you just change the built environment without changing the housing policies, it's going to lead to gentrification and displacement. So yes, you change the built environment, but you also make sure that you remove all exclusionary zoning. There is zoning that is out there that is anti any density, and because of density apartments and the like, they're like that because they associate any higher density with Black, brown, and low income folk. So they have what's called NIMBYism, NIBY ism, not in my backyard ism. And as someone that sits on the planning board, I could tell you one responsibility that we have is we're not present when these decisions are being made. There's a reason why they call it a master plan. We don't even participate to change or create that master plan. And so when these things are happening, we're paying attention to who the representative is and not the policies that are on the books.
Mhm.
So we have to do more of that. But I can go on and on. I'll stop until you ask me a question.
Well, if you can believe it, we are already an hour in. So we want to make sure that we get all of your socials and stuff out there. So we are run this banner. So Equitable Cities is the firm that you created. Tell us a little bit about Equitable Cities.
Yeah, so Equitable Cities is a global consultancy focused at the intersection of transportation, health, and equity. We do planning, urban planning, we do public policy, and we also do research, both qualitative and quantitative research with federal, state, local governments across the world.
And then Arrested Mobility. You obviously talked about it as a concept, but you actually do have a podcast. So tell us more about your podcast.
Yeah, so the podcast dives deeper into each of the issues. One way you can look at arrested mobility, for instance, is Black and brown folks receiving tickets for biking on the sidewalk. It explores, why that is not the correct policy and the ways in which we can undo some of these policies that we feel disproportionately target Black and brown folks. So I invite friends of mine who are experts from around the world to address these topics, from the wearing of bike helmets to sidewalk riding to e-scooter bans throughout North America. People should check it out.
Awesome. I remember I listened to your podcast about jaywalking. That was a very insightful one. I think it was your first
Hmm.
episode. And I know there was a gentleman he mentioned, and I'm gonna forget the last name again because we heard about Breonna Taylor so much, and he mentioned Breonna, someone else, another Breonna, but
Oh, yeah.
it was a jaywalking incident, and it was a lot of things that I learned and never thought about. I mean, especially when you go to big cities like New York, everybody jaywalks, and so
Right.
you don't think about the implications and how jaywalking can actually, it is more dangerous for Black and brown people.
Yeah.
So we threw up your Twitter and LinkedIn at CT Brown 1911 if folks want to get in contact with you. Man, this has been awesome. I'm gonna toss it to my sister because
Well, it's been very insightful, and we want to thank you for coming back. We dropped also the links to your websites in the chat. If you think that this conversation, that someone else needs to hear it, as we said always, make sure you share it with someone. Copy the YouTube link and send it to someone. If you have folks that work in public policy, if you're involved in urban planning, or even as just as a concerned citizen about what's going on in your community, share this episode with someone and say, hey, I want you to take a look at that, because I want to know why in our community, what's the stats here in this community in which we live, work, and play. What are the stats here in our own community, and then what can we do about it?
Hmm.
And how do we create more equitable environments? We here in our own hometown, we have this love-hate relationship because the inequity is so visible. It's glaring.
Especially in Timber. Oh, I can't say your hometown. My bad.
Yeah, you can say it. I mean,
no,
Yeah.
I mean,
the inequity is,
I didn't want to put your location out there,
yeah,
but
the
'cause we're in the
inequity,
bunker.
the inequity is glaring. But even as I drive around Orlando, Florida, where I am, where I reside on a regular basis, after these different things, these inequities are glaring based on zip code,
Yeah.
in terms of how neighborhoods are constructed, how people are able to move freely or not move freely. It is very glaring. And I think once people start paying attention, you're like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? So yeah, it's very interesting. So if you are a concerned citizen, talk to the people in your community about this, share this, contact Charles, have him come out and have the conversation, because I think we can do better than we're doing now, and we all deserve better than what we have now. So that's my closing pitch. What do you want to say in closing?
So I'm gonna make this long because number one, I feel like
you want to make it long.
Yep, I'm gonna make it long.
Oh, okay.
Because the last
Just
time,
leave me an opportunity to say one thing. If you,
yeah, I
you
will.
want me to
I
go
will.
before you, all right.
No, I'm gonna let you go after me, but you're gonna. I'm not. I'm just trying to tell you.
Because
I
we know,
remember
Demetria, we know.
one of the
Go ahead.
things that since you've been doing this work, because I didn't even get into how you transformed over these last few years, right? But anyway, since you've been doing this work, I remember at the top of the pandemic when we all couldn't go anywhere for real, and I remember being like, wow, it was one of those moments that I so appreciated, living in a neighborhood with sidewalks and living in a neighborhood with a park, and then reflecting on the fact that even in those times, we we still had to be very careful about walking in our own neighborhood. And I went to an HOA meeting. I think I told you this before, and this lady was she brought a complaint about a neighbor who had her dog off the leash, and she was a white woman, and the president is a white man, and he was like, well, did you call the police? And she was like, for a dog off the leash? She was like, yeah. I mean, did you call the police? I call the police all the time. Why, people speed through, I call the police all the time, you know. And she was like, I mean, by the time they get there, the person probably is back in their house, what have you. And he kept saying, call the police, call the police. And I just was like, we ain't doing that. I was like, we. And I was pointing to me and Rob, ain't calling the police. Because I was like, I don't know how many times when I see the police in my part of the community, I immediately am like, what's going on? Because there is a natural fear that somebody is going to think that I don't belong. I'm not supposed to be in that neighborhood because they have a certain belief about who can live in certain neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. So I just have to say that, because obviously calling the police can be life or death for a lot of us. So anyway, last words, sir.
Well, final words. Thank you both so much. You know how much respect and appreciation I have for the two of you. Christina, you really changed my life when I met a young lady as smart as you when we were working together. It was a sight to behold, and continues to be. What I want to say for the people is that encourage your children. It's great to have them go into engineering and architecture, but it's even better to have them go into urban planning, because we have to focus on the bigger picture, with all due respect to engineers. Um, Another thing, Demetria, as it relates, we were both residents of Orlando. Have people think about Paramore, which is para no more.
Mm-hmm.
Paramore was a historically Black community, and I've seen the policies that have turned that into para no more as it relates to Black people. Lastly, um, I started with your father in the Hey Brother piece. There's a strong back movement out here to recognize our sisters, our Black sisters, and it's important. We should do that always. But let's not forget the Black men out there who are working every single day to be positive examples for little boys and girls. And to illustrate the importance of this, please have everyone go to the Black Population Index. It's the Black Population Index, which was created by Dr. Andre Perry. And it gives you a breakdown of which variables will lead to an increase in, I think, lifespan. One of the things that was positively associated with an increased lifespan was having fathers in our homes. And so we need more Black fathers in our home. I can see what a great job your Black father has done. And so I want to continue to salute him and honor him in this moment. And thank you all again for me being here. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Folks, go take a look. We're going to drop that in here as well, the Black Population Index. We are grateful for you, Charles. We will definitely have you back again. And we're also going to probably share this information with some folks, because more people need to hear this information. So with that, we're signing off. So you hold the line, Charles, as we wave goodbye to everybody. Good night.